When I sealed off my private dock, I thought I was protecting my property. Instead, I sparked a war. One unhinged HOA president, dozens of trespassers, and a boat engulfed in flames later. I found myself in court fighting for everything I owned. You won't believe how far she went. When I bought the place, all I wanted was peace. Just me, the water, and a slip big enough to dock 2 yachts without bumping hulls. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I'd spent 22 years in the Navy, and after retiring, I'd earned the right to watch the tide roll in from my own damn backyard. My slice of Florida wasn't cheap, but it came with exactly what I needed. Privacy, dock access, and the legal satisfaction of not being under any HOA's thumb. Not technically, not vaguely, not at all. I installed a sturdy gate on the dock entrance, added my name, Private Rose Pier, in clean white letters, and thought that would be enough. The neighbors? Sure, they waved sometimes, I waved back. But I wasn't looking to make friends, not here. Not anymore. Then came Karen. She arrived in late spring in a sleek white BMW with HOA stickers, oversized sunglasses, and a little puffed-up dog that looked like it had anxiety issues. I clocked her from my window the first day, clipboard in hand, pointing at things like air. I should have known right then. We didn't formally meet until a Saturday in early May. I was pressure washing the lower dock when I heard her voice, shrill, loud, bouncing across the canal like a car alarm that wouldn't shut off. "Excuse me. Sir, hello?" I looked up. She was standing at the gate. Behind her, about 15 people, dressed in matching polos, boat shoes, holding wine glasses at noon, were gathering near the seawall. One of them was already trying the latch. "You mind opening this?" she called out, all smile, no warmth. "We're setting up for the HOA mixer. It's dockside this month." I turned off the washer. Water dripped from my sleeves as I walked up the slope toward her. "This isn't the HOA dock," I said calmly, resting a hand on the gate. "This is my private pier. See the sign?" She let out a breathy laugh. "Oh, we know. But this dock faces the shared canal, and under Section 5 of our community easement agreement, waterfront access is community managed." She rattled it off like she'd memorized the entire HOA handbook and had been dying for someone to challenge her on it. "That may be," I said, "but my property deed states clearly that the dock, slip, and shoreline up to 6 feet into the water are privately owned. This isn't shared. This is mine. You're trespassing." The smile dropped a millimeter. "I'm Karen Green," she said, straightening. "President of Baylight Shores HOA. We've always used this dock for events. It's a tradition. Mr. Vaughn, the previous owner, never had an issue." "Well, I'm not Mr. Vaughn," I said, "and the tradition ends here." She narrowed her eyes like I'd insulted her dog. "You can't just close off public waterfront like that." "I didn't," I replied. "I closed off my dock, which you're still standing on." She took half a step back, her wine-glass friends whispering behind her, trying to act casual but clearly ready to mob the pier. One guy in salmon-colored shorts actually muttered, "Come on, just open it. It's not that deep." Karen didn't back down. She adjusted her sunglasses, squared her shoulders, and gave me a tight-lipped smile. "This isn't over, Mr. Rose, Justin Rose," she nodded once, sharp and practiced. "You'll be hearing from us." And with that, she turned and marched off, a pack of disappointed socialites trailing behind her like ducklings who'd been denied pond access. I stood there for a moment, soaking wet, holding a pressure washer nozzle in one hand and feeling like I'd just stepped into some low-budget HOA-themed episode of Succession. I locked the gate and went back to cleaning algae off the boat ramp, but something about the way she'd said "hearing from us" lingered. Like this wasn't some neighborly misunderstanding. Like this was war. The next morning, a printed letter appeared folded into my mailbox. No stamp, no envelope, just tucked in like a threat. It was on Baylight Shore's HOA letterhead, of course. Formal notice of non-compliance, it read. Unauthorized denial of community access to shared waterfront. It demanded I remove the gate within 72 hours or face formal action. At the bottom in bold. This is a warning. Cooperation is expected. Resistance will escalate consequences. I read it 3 times, then poured myself a coffee, walked down to the dock, and stared out at the calm water. Pelicans skimmed the surface, the morning sun catching the tips of the waves. I took a long sip and smiled. I dealt with pirates in the Gulf, cartel lookouts off the Yucatan, and customs officials in ports where bribes were just part of the dress code. I could handle one HOA Karen. I walked back up the slope, pulled out a padlock from the toolbox, and made sure the gate clicked shut louder than necessary. Let her escalate. By the next week, the HOA letters began arriving with the reliability of tides. Every morning, sometime between 8 and 9, a neatly folded notice would be wedged into my mailbox like a persistent reminder that someone out there desperately needed a hobby. Most people collect stamps or take up paddleboarding. Karen collected grievances. The tone escalated with every new notice. The first accused me of obstructing communal enjoyment of shared waterfront assets. The second insisted I was in violation of community harmony standards. By the time the third arrived, accusing me of creating a hostile environment toward neighborhood cooperation, I realized these were written by someone who loved power more than oxygen. The letters never had a stamp, which meant someone walked them over personally. Given the perfume cloud still lingering on the paper, I had a good guess who. At first, I tossed them directly into a shoebox in my pantry. Navy experience taught me that chaos often documents itself, so I figured keeping everything wouldn't hurt. Had no idea yet how right I was. Around this time, the neighbors started eyeing me differently. I noticed it when I walked out to get the mail and saw 2 women from 2 doors down whispering behind a hibiscus bush like middle schoolers planning a coup. One of them actually said, loud enough for me to hear, "Well, Karen said he's blocking emergency water access." Emergency water access. Apparently my dock now had life-saving importance to people who didn't even know what side of a boat starboard was. Then came the day I caught a guy in a sun visor photographing my dock from the sidewalk. He wasn't subtle. He stood there for a solid 30 seconds, snapping pictures like he was documenting a crime scene. "You need a better zoom lens," I called out from the porch. He jumped, startled, and stammered, "Just, HOA business," before scurrying off like a frightened crab. By then, I'd begun noticing the pattern. When Karen felt challenged, she didn't confront, she mobilized. The woman could weaponize gossip faster than most people could microwave dinner. I decided it was time to bring in someone with actual authority. Not HOA authority, real state-certified authority. My attorney, Daniel Mercer, was a calm, quiet man who looked like he billed by the minute even in conversation. Perfect for this sort of fight. When I explained everything, he didn't even raise an eyebrow. "You are not within the HOA community map," he said. "They have 0 jurisdiction beyond social pressure. Just document everything, especially anything that indicates harassment." Harassment? She's just being loud. He gave me the kind of look lawyers give when clients are being adorably naive. Document everything. So I did. I kept the letters. I kept the dates. I started saving screenshots of neighborhood posts, which I hadn't wanted to check but felt obligated to. A neighborhood Facebook group had sprung up discussing my dock like it was the Berlin Wall. My personal favorite was a post claiming I'd stolen the shoreline in a sneaky purchase loophole. whatever that meant. The truth was that Karen had momentum. She'd convinced at least half a dozen neighbors that I was hoarding some priceless community asset, even though none of them had ever set foot on the water. And when I tried to talk to a few of them directly, the responses were awkward at best. One guy stepped backward so fast he nearly tripped over his sprinkler hose. But things shifted from annoying to serious the night I saw two unfamiliar teenagers climb over my dock gate. They didn't break anything. They just poked around near the mooring posts before running off when my floodlights kicked on. Kids being stupid wasn't unusual around waterfronts, but the timing, a little too convenient. I checked the camera footage later. One of them wore a hoodie with the Baylight Shores HOA emblem. That wasn't coincidence. That was influence. The next morning, I installed an extra camera facing the gate and added a second lock for good measure. I knew it wouldn't stop anyone determined enough, but it would at least make them think twice. And maybe it would make Karen think twice, too. I underestimated her. 2 days later, she brought reinforcements. 3 board members in matching teal shirts that looked like they'd been printed for a cult retreat. They stationed themselves at the end of my cul-de-sac and conducted what appeared to be an inspection. Though from where I stood inside my house, it looked more like they were rehearsing complaints. Every so often, one of them pointed dramatically at my dock, shaking their head like it personally offended them. That afternoon, a new letter appeared. Longer, meaner, printed in bold. The highlights included refusal to operate as a cooperative neighbor, illegitimate privatization of community-relevant structures, and my personal favorite, urgent expectation of compliance upon pain of disciplinary measures. Disciplinary measures. I hadn't heard that phrase since boot camp, and back then I was being yelled at by someone legally permitted to throw me overboard. Unbelievable, I muttered. Absolutely unbelievable. But I didn't rip the letter up. I placed it neatly in the shoebox, closed the lid, and slid it under the counter. Then, because peace is sometimes the sharpest blade, I walked down to the dock, clicked the locks closed, and made sure the gate clanged loud enough to echo. If Karen wanted escalation, she'd chosen the wrong guy to test. I should have known it was coming. Karen wasn't the type to back off after losing a battle. If anything, she saw it as an invitation to go nuclear. The evening it happened, I'd just returned from a supply run. Nothing special, just rope, sealant, and a few cans of deck stain. When I noticed the lock on the dock gate was different. Not broken, replaced. A smooth chrome combo lock. One I definitely hadn't put there. For a moment, I just stood there, holding the paper bag full of hardware store purchases, staring at that smug piece of metal like it had personally insulted me. Then I set the bag down, walked back to the garage, and returned with bolt cutters. One snap, clean, efficient, satisfying, and the lock fell into the grass. I opened the gate slowly, like walking into a crime scene. That's exactly what it felt like. There were footprints. Maybe 6 or 7 people, sandal tracks, boat shoes, and what looked like a goddamn high heel. A bottle of rosé lay half-finished near the railing. Someone had dropped a napkin embroidered with Baylight HOA mixer. My dock had been turned into a party venue. It wasn't just trespassing. It was a message. I checked the footage from my cameras later that night. The feed was clear. Karen striding in with 2 women and at least 4 men, all laughing, sipping wine, clinking glasses. They didn't even try to be sneaky. One of the guys actually toasted to the camera. That was the moment I decided this wasn't just personal. It was strategic. Next morning, I printed stills from the footage, labeled them with timestamps, and slid them into a manila folder. I wasn't going to be passive anymore. I called Daniel, my attorney. She broke in, I said. Change the lock. You're sure? I have it on video, and a goddamn cocktail napkin. I could hear the smile in his voice. Then let's file a cease and desist officially. I'll draw it up. While he worked on the paperwork, I did my part. I took a walk around the neighborhood, not to confront, to observe. The reaction was mixed. One neighbor saw me and nodded awkwardly, then quickly turned back to his hedge trimming like he'd been caught peeking into a confessional. Another, a woman who'd always waved at me before and across the street with her golden retriever and pretended not to see me. But there was one, an older man named Frank, who stopped me with a frown. "Justin," he said quietly, "I don't want trouble, but people are saying you slammed the gate on purpose, that you tried to intimidate them. By locking my own dock?" He raised a hand. "Hey, I know it's yours, but Karen's saying you're trying to secede from the community." "Secede?" I almost laughed. "What is this, the Civil War?" He didn't smile. "I'm just telling you what I heard." By that evening, the cease and desist letter was ready. Daniel delivered it in person to the HOA board office, a converted guest bedroom in Karen's home. He said she refused to come to the door, made him hand it through the mail slot like he was delivering anthrax. Hours later, a post appeared on the neighborhood Facebook group titled, "Attempted Intimidation by Anti-Community Element." It included a blurry image of me, taken, I suspect, during my walk, and a lengthy caption about how I was escalating hostilities against peace-loving residents and rejecting all reasonable compromise. Compromise? They broke into my dock and threw a party. The next morning I opened the gate, my gate now with my lock again, and found a bouquet of dead flowers tied to the post with fishing line. Petals everywhere, a passive-aggressive funeral offering. It was both dramatic and pathetic. I plucked them off, threw them in the trash, and sat down on the dock bench to think. This wasn't going away on its own, and it wasn't just about some drunk socialites trespassing. It was about control. Karen had run the HOA for nearly 8 years. She was used to everyone folding, either from fear, exhaustion, or social pressure. I was an anomaly, a boundary she couldn't override, and I was making her unravel. Later that week, she made her most outrageous move yet. She called the cops. I was working in the boathouse when I heard them. 2 cruisers pulling up, tires crunching gravel, doors slamming. One officer came down the walkway while the other stayed back, hand on his holster like I was building a meth lab. "Sir," the lead officer said, polite but cautious, "we've had a report of aggressive behavior regarding a shared structure. We're just here to talk." I kept my tone even. "The dock? Yeah, it's not shared." I invited them in, showed the deed, showed the footage, even pointed to the lock still dangling from the fence. My original one split clean by bolt cutters and replaced by Karen's gleaming version. The officer took notes, nodded thoughtfully. "This all checks out." "Want to see the party footage?" I offered. He smiled faintly. "Not necessary, but good to know it's documented." They left without incident, but I knew word would spread that police came by. Karen didn't need to win legal battles. She just needed public theater. Too bad for her, I was filming the whole play. I uploaded the footage, unedited, to a private YouTube link and embedded it on the local HOA discussion board. Title: Unauthorized Access Baylight Shores HOA Mixer, May 17th. Within 24 hours, views cracked into the hundreds. Within 48, the comments started rolling in. And by the 3rd day, the board was very, very quiet. It started with the music. Not faint background chatter, not someone's Bluetooth speaker. I'm talking full-blown DJ setup bass that vibrated the damn canal. I heard it before I saw it. It was just past sundown, and I'd been upstairs finishing a repair on the mast light panel when the windows began to rattle. I looked out across the water and felt my stomach drop. Floodlights, tiki torches, laughter amplified through wireless microphones, and boats, a line of them, rafted together and tied directly to my mooring cleats. My cleats. The same ones I'd personally reinforced last summer with stainless steel bolts and marine-grade epoxy. It wasn't just trespassing. It was a goddamn flotilla. I headed downstairs and stormed down toward the dock. Sure enough, the gate, my locked gate, was wide open. The chain hung off the post like it had been sliced, which it had. I'd see later on the camera feed that someone brought bolt cutters again. Subtlety had left the chat. Dozens of people milled about on the dock and boats. They wore floral shirts and held fruity drinks in plastic tumblers. Music thumped underfoot and a remix of something unholy and electronic. I recognized some of them, a couple of HOA board members, that woman from 3 houses down who always wore Crocs. And of course, front and center, perched like a goddamn queen on a teak deck chair, was Karen. "Justin!" she called out with a tipsy cheer like we were old friends meeting at a country club. "You made it." I didn't answer. I scanned the dock, noting the speaker rig, the folding table sagging under the weight of Costco shrimp cocktail, the empty champagne bottles rolling in the corner near my marine battery housing. "You're trespassing," I said loud and clear. Karen smiled wider. "Relax, we're just celebrating the season. It's the Baylight Shores summer splash." I took a breath. "On private property, mine. You broke in, again." She stood, a little wobbly, holding onto a wine glass like it was a legal defense. "Justin, the HOA board voted. Since you continue to deny access to what has traditionally been community shoreline, we exercised our rights under emergency event guidelines." "Emergency event," I repeated. "Chapter 8, she said with an unsteady nod. "Temporary reallocation of underutilized resources in the interest of community cohesion." I blinked. "Karen, that's not real law. That's monopoly rules written in Sharpie." She didn't like that. Her smile stiffened. "The board supports this." I glanced around. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One of the guys on the next boat over suddenly became very interested in his mojito. "Everyone here's complicit," I said. "You're on my dock, on my lines, without permission. That's criminal trespass, Karen. You cut a lock. You destroyed property." She scoffed, waved a hand. "Oh, don't be dramatic." I pulled out my phone and held it up. The camera light turned on. "Go ahead. Say that again for the record." She turned her back on me, but others didn't. One of the newer neighbors, Ben, I think his name was, guy who just moved in last month, walked up to me sheepishly. "Look, I didn't realize this wasn't approved. I thought this was sanctioned." "It's not," I said, "and the footage will make that very clear." Ben muttered something, turned, and climbed back onto his little pontoon boat, untying it from my cleat like it was covered in plague. That was the start of the exodus. One by one, people began pulling away, some apologizing, some just not making eye contact. Within 10 minutes, the party had turned into a ghost dock. Karen stood there alone, clutching her glass like a shipwreck survivor with no raft. "You think this makes you the hero?" she snapped at me as I locked the gate again. "You're a bully, Justin. You're dividing this community." I met her eyes. "No, I'm protecting my property. There's a difference." She didn't reply, just stormed off the dock and up the path in silence, her heels clicking against the boards like the world's angriest metronome. By the next morning, flyers had gone out, some shoved in mailboxes, some taped to lampposts. Big, bold letters at the top. "Who owns the water? The truth about the dock dispute." It was filled with misleading language talking about historical usage, community gatherings, and, my favorite, aggressive retaliation by non-cooperative residents. Me, apparently. But something had shifted. A couple neighbors sent me private messages on the community app, quietly apologizing for being involved. One woman left fresh lemons from her tree on my doorstep with a note that just said, "You were right." Even the HOA board began to fracture. One member, a guy named Stewart, resigned that week. Posted a message saying he no longer felt comfortable supporting the current leadership's handling of certain property disputes. And when I drove past the clubhouse later that week, I saw something even more telling. Karen, standing alone outside, arguing with two older residents who clearly weren't backing down. Her voice was raised, her hands were flying, the cracks were starting to show, but I knew better than to think it was over. Karen wasn't someone who knew how to lose. She was someone who doubled down, even if it meant burning the whole damn pier. I smelled the smoke before I saw it. It was sometime around 4 in the morning, that dead hour when the world is quiet and only the truly unhinged are awake. I was half asleep brewing coffee after a bout of insomnia when the scent hit me. Not the woody, distant kind you get from someone's fireplace, but acrid and sharp. Burning plastic, fiberglass, fuel. I ran to the window. Flames licked the sky. It took me a second to process what I was seeing. My dock was aglow in flickering orange, shadows dancing wildly against the boathouse wall. But it wasn't the dock that was on fire. It was the mariner's pride. My boat. My goddamn pride. By the time I sprinted outside, barefoot on the gravel, the fire had already swallowed the cockpit. The mast had collapsed inward, burning rigging flailing in the wind like flaming vines. I screamed into the void and grabbed the hose, like a hose could do anything against that kind of blaze. Neighbors started pouring out of their homes. Flashlights, phones, voices yelling. Someone had already called 911. I heard sirens in the distance growing louder. The fire brigade arrived within minutes, fast, professional, and grim. They did what they could, dousing the flames and isolating the fuel tanks, but the mariner's pride was already gutted. By the time the last hiss of steam faded, the boat was just a charred carcass rocking gently in the slip like a corpse still trying to float. I stood there for what felt like hours. Smoke clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. Every inch of me smelled like ash and chemicals. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The arson investigator showed up just after dawn. A grizzled guy named Donovan who smelled like cigarette butts and skepticism. He did a sweep of the scene, muttering to himself and taking notes. I gave my statement, then took him into the house to show the camera footage. At 3:42 a.m., the security feed caught it. A hooded figure walking briskly toward the dock. Slim build, purposeful gait, a canister in one hand. No hesitation, no attempt to hide. They walked straight to the hull, poured the liquid over the deck, lit a match, and stepped back like they'd done it a dozen times before. The image wasn't perfect, grainy night footage, but the posture, the movement, the shape of the bag hanging from her shoulder. I didn't even have to say it. Donovan squinted at the screen and said, "You know her?" I nodded once. "Karen Green, HOA president, or she was. You're pressing charges?" "Are you kidding?" I said. "I want her arrested." And she was. Later that afternoon, 2 sheriff's deputies rolled up to her house in a dusty Tahoe and walked her out in cuffs. I didn't see it in person. I didn't need to. Someone filmed it and posted it to the neighborhood group chat with the caption, "HOA president detained over arson allegations." No filter, no soft angles. Karen didn't even resist. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared blankly ahead as they put her in the cruiser like it wasn't happening to her at all. Like she was somewhere else entirely. That same evening, an emergency statement was posted on the Baylight Shores HOA website. The HOA board categorically condemns all criminal activity. The actions of Ms. Green were taken independently and without the knowledge or consent of the board. Effective immediately, Karen Green has been removed from her position pending legal proceedings. Thrown to the wolves. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Daniel, my lawyer, called me the next day. His voice was unusually upbeat. "I've drafted a new complaint," he said. "It's not just criminal now. We're going civil, full force. We're naming Karen and the HOA in a joint lawsuit." "They're already trying to distance themselves," I said, "claiming she acted alone." "They can try," he replied, "but we've got years of letters, statements, emails, community posts. Half of this HOA followed her into that lunacy. The other half did nothing to stop her. That's gross negligence." "What's the angle?" "Destruction of property, emotional distress, malicious trespassing, conspiracy to defame, and targeted harassment over an extended period. And we're going after the assets, the HOA fund, their boats, their clubhouse budget, everything." I didn't speak for a few seconds. "Good," I said finally. "Burn it all." Over the next week, things went quiet. Karen was denied bail after the footage was reviewed by the judge. Too calculated, too dangerous. Her mugshot was printed in the local paper right next to an article about the HOA's troubled leadership history. Stewart, the former board member, publicly apologized in a letter published in the town newsletter. Others followed, some sincere, others clearly just trying to stay out of the legal crossfire. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't interested in apologies. I wanted accountability. The Mariner's pride had been my escape. Years of savings, modifications, memories. She was supposed to be where I spent the next decade sailing through quiet mornings and hurricane seasons alike. Now she was ash. And somewhere in the county jail, Karen Green sat in an orange jumpsuit, probably still muttering about bylaws and community cohesion. I hoped her cell didn't have a view of the water. Court is a strange place to relive your trauma. Everything is too clean, too quiet, too organized. Like trying to explain a car crash using graphs and bullet points. The trial began 6 weeks after the fire. It was hot, Florida in full sweat mode, and the courthouse AC worked like an asthmatic goat. My lawyer, Daniel, showed up every morning looking like a man attending his own victory parade. Calm, tailored, merciless. Karen sat across from me in her charcoal suit, flanked by a defense team that looked like they were all billing by the second. She didn't smile. She didn't glare. She just stared at nothing, as if pretending this was happening to someone else. Again. The state handled the criminal charges: arson, destruction of private property, criminal trespassing, and reckless endangerment. My civil suit was separate but attached, piggybacking on the same mountain of evidence. The footage spoke first. There she was again and again in court clarity HD, breaking in, hosting events, cutting locks, pouring accelerant, lighting the match. Daniel played the full sequence without edits. The room was silent by the time it ended. Then came the paper trail, HOA memos, her signature on the emergency access documents, emails with board members joking about how I was hoarding the coastline like a pirate. Even a text she'd sent one of her cronies. "If he wants to gate himself off from the community, maybe we should show him what happens to fences in hurricanes." Subtle. The board tried to weasel out, of course. Their new president, a damp handshake of a man named Allen, testified that the organization had no knowledge of Ms. Green's independent actions. Daniel ate him alive. "You served under her for how many years?" 7. "You approved how many event budgets?" "About a dozen? And you had no idea she was engaging in illegal activity on behalf of the HOA?" Allen squirmed like someone had set a fire under his chair. The witnesses kept coming. Ben, the new neighbor, testified that Karen had explicitly told partygoers that she owned the dock now. Stewart, the resigned board member, confirmed that she regularly threatened legal action against non-compliant neighbors and often ignored internal objections. Then came my turn. I kept it simple. I talked about the dock, about the boat, about the smell of smoke and the hours spent watching something I built collapse in a wash of fire and foam. I told the court I didn't want revenge. I wanted consequences. Apparently, so did the jury. The verdict came after 4 hours of deliberation. On the criminal side, Karen was found guilty on all counts. The judge gave her 6 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 3. No chance of house arrest, no leniency. She didn't cry. She just blinked, slowly, like her brain needed time to catch up. But the real fireworks came with the civil ruling. The HOA was found liable for negligence, complicity, and defamation. The court awarded me full damages for the boat, estimated at just over $700,000, plus legal costs, plus punitive compensation for harassment, stress, and invasion of privacy. In total, $1.2 million. But that wasn't all. Daniel, genius that he is, filed for asset seizure, and the judge granted it. The HOA's fleet, 3 boats used for community events and patrols, were legally transferred to my name as part of the restitution. Their clubhouse budget was frozen, their board forced into immediate re-election. Karen wasn't there to hear the final ruling. She'd already been transferred to county. The courtroom emptied like a leaking ship. HOA members didn't make eye contact with me. A few nodded awkwardly. Some looked like they wanted to say something but thought better of it. Outside, Daniel clapped me on the back. "Well," he said, adjusting his tie, "at least you didn't settle." I looked out at the parking lot. The sky was bright and cloudless. Across the road, you could just barely see the edge of the marina. "No," I said, "we finished it." I got home that night and walked down to the water. The dock was quiet, clean, rebuilt, new lines, fresh sealant, no cut chains, no torches, no flyers, no angry HOA patrols, just water and silence. 8 months later, I threw a party. Not a passive-aggressive HOA gathering, not a wine in a solo cup mixer, a real party. No speeches, no bylaws, just fire-grilled burgers, cold beer, blues guitar playing from a portable amp, and laughter echoing across the canal. The new dock gleamed under the sunset. I'd rebuilt it wider, stronger, and better than before. Added cedar benches, motion lights, and a new sign bolted dead center onto the gate in big brass letters. Private dock. Former HOA boats only by invitation. I now owned all 3 boats the HOA once lorded over residents like they were ancient Roman chariots. I'd renamed them too. One was now Petty Karen. The second, a little patrol skiff, I called Neighborhood Watchdog. And the last, the big one, the one they used to hold their smug little meetings on, the Community Spirit, now equipped with a bar, a new sound system, and a foam cannon. Irony's best served with an umbrella in your drink. People showed up early, not just neighbors, actual neighbors, the ones who never liked Karen but stayed quiet to avoid her wrath. Some had been on the fence for months. Tonight they crossed it. A couple even brought wine and jokes about how they used to think I was the crazy one. The new HOA board came too. Less authoritarian, more awkward PTA energy. Their new president, a guy named Jonah, approached me with visible nerves. "Mr. Rose," he began, "on behalf of the board, I just want to thank you for, not suing us a second time." "Don't tempt me," I said, smiling. "I'm starting to enjoy courtrooms." He laughed, nervously, then handed me a Tupperware of deviled eggs and disappeared. Later that night, I manned the grill while the Community Spirit bobbed nearby, music playing low from her speakers. I watched kids run barefoot down the dock. No locks, no angry notes taped to their parents' doors. Just people being people, free if a little sunburned. My dog, Radar, lay in the grass next to the fire pit, half asleep with his head on a throw pillow someone had brought from home. Someone handed me a beer. A neighbor I barely knew asked if I'd teach her kid to tie a bowline knot. And then, as the night wound down, Ben, the guy who'd testified in court, sidled up beside me. "You know," he said, "this is the most peaceful it's been here since I moved in." I nodded. "Takes a few fires to scare off the termites." He chuckled. "You didn't just win a lawsuit, you scared the hell out of every HOA in this zip code." "Good," I said. "Maybe next time they'll think twice before telling someone how to use their own dock." As the last guests left and the moon climbed higher, I sat down on the edge of the pier. The water was calm. The world was quiet. Radar snored softly behind me, and for the first time in nearly a year, no one tried to throw a party on my property without asking. Victory didn't need confetti, just peace, a cold drink, and the legal ownership of 3 former HOA boats.